Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. I'm Pride, and today we're going to have a blend of Vermintide 1 and Vermintide 2 Legend gameplay as we talk about one of the biggest features and new additions in the sequel to the finest rodent extermination simulator of all time. I'm, of course, talking about hero power, but while we will certainly be covering the basics of the system, having now played over 100 hours of V2 and close to 500 on the first game, I can safely say that I have some problems with how the whole thing has been implemented, and at this point, I'm not sure there's an easy fix. This is not a doomsday video in any way, shape, or form. I'm still really enjoying V2, think it's an awesome game, but it's not without its fair share of flaws, and I'll be covering one of them in this video. So right off the bat, what is hero power? Put simply, it is a scaling system used to determine your damage output and to get you behind difficulties you aren't ready to take on yet. It was put in place in part to prevent new players from jumping directly into Champion or Legend, where they would get absolutely gangbanged and pancaked into oblivion within 5 seconds of joining a run. Obviously, that's not a great way to retain players, right? If the first experience someone has with fighting Skaven and Chaos together in hand-to-hand combat is going down in the first horde as 2 Packmasters, a Leech, and a Poison Wind Clobadier all drop their loads on your head all simultaneously, that's not going to be a great first experience. So, Fat Shark came up with an entirely new feature, one that has no precedence in the prequel whatsoever, that gates people off from joining higher level difficulties right off the bat. Hero power is, to put it mildly, incredibly impactful. It directly affects the amount of damage you deal every single time you attack, it affects how much you cleave through opponents, or rather how many enemies you can hit with a single swing, and it affects the degree to which your attacks stagger an enemy. If you've ever bullied a Storm Vermin in this game with some simple light attacks, just knocking him around and stealing his lunch money, that's all hero power right there. So, to take on higher level difficulties, you want to raise your hero power, right? Because it will allow you to cleave through and destroy hordes that much quicker, penetrate through and kill armored targets that much easier, and progress through missions at a much more rapid pace. The number is visibly and arbitrarily capped at 600, as an aggregate of your 5 item slots and your intrinsic power from leveling. Each character has a maximum level of 30, you gain 10 power per level, 30 times 10 is 300, and then average together with your 5 item slots. So if you have 5 300 power items, your item power is 300. Add that to your power from leveling, and you get 600. 300 plus 300 equals 600. Item power plus level power equals overall hero power. And that one number right there determines how much you cleave, how much damage you do, how much you stagger opponents. Boom. Done. Okay. So, there is a fundamental problem with a system like this. When cleave, stagger, pushing power, and damage output are all tied into this one stat, it makes for an incredibly bizarre transition between the difficulties in the game, especially for newer players. Vermintide 2 already, in the first week of release, outsold the first game, so tons of new faces, much bigger community, more popular game. And these new players are greeted by a system that lacks defining patterns or characteristics for combat from one difficulty to the next, and it makes the game much harder to learn overall. In Vermintide 1, there was no such thing as hero power, and the combat worked extremely well for it. Instead of being tied to your level and overall power score, damage was directly tied to the rarity of your weapon and the type of weapon. These operated in the exact same set of tiers we have now, white being the lowest quality, followed by green, blue, orange, then red. Most importantly, whether a weapon was the lowest or the highest quality of weapon, it would still function in the exact same manner, no matter what difficulty you were playing on. Take the Elf Glaive for instance. Doesn't matter if it was the crappiest glaive in the game or the best glaive you could possibly drop, it would never hit more than 2 targets with a single swing. Ever. That was the maximum number of targets you could hit, so whether you're playing on normal or Cataclysm, the weapon might do less damage, but it would still function the exact same way. Or we could take the two-handed hammer for instance. With the charged attack, you will always be able to hit infinite unarmored targets and control them in V1, but you will only ever do damage to the first 2 in your swing. So while you could certainly do some serious crowd control, your damage output was pretty limited. But this allowed people rocking with low quality two-handed hammers to still make an impact on higher difficulties because the weapon would still stagger 20 plus ratmen at a time no problem. You could learn how to play with it, how to position with it, how it would react when hitting enemies in any situation, and this allowed you to transfer that knowledge if you went up in difficulty. This doesn't work in Vermintide 2, and that's a problem. Because right now, a sword you really like might cleave through, say, 4 targets on Veteran when you're at 200 hero power, but if you jumped up in a champion tomorrow, it might be below a certain threshold and only cleave through 2 targets instead of 4. It might lose its stagger on push that you had just a day before, it might lose its ability to interrupt a storm vermin overhead with a charge attack, and now, suddenly, everything you've learned over several hours of playtime you have to unlearn, until your hero power reaches a point where it begins functioning properly again, and then the whole process repeats when you go up to Legend after that. It creates very inconsistent gameplay, where a setup that you were really loving on Veteran suddenly becomes very anemic and weak sauce on Champion because your hero level hasn't caught up yet. And this is honestly just a problematic design decision from the ground up, because it's needlessly confusing, it's infinitely harder to balance, and it makes learning the game more challenging with no real payoff or benefit in the long run. So having Fat Shark set consistent cleave and stagger values, regardless of hero power, and making those be based on the weapon types themselves, like how it functioned in Vermintide 1, would make many of the issues that are cropping up in Vermintide 2 simply disappear. The problem is, I don't know if changing the system itself is even viable at this point. It's entirely possible, it's so deeply encoded, they'll be stuck trying to balance it with no real way out of this whole system whatsoever. Which is frankly just not an enviable task. If I was one of those coders or developers, it'd be super frustrating. I imagine they're very frustrated with the whole situation. The whole thing kind of sucks. And the problems that have cropped up because of this hero power system have been innumerable. There are 15 plus hero talents that literally do nothing right now because they're tied to power. Power wasn't implemented properly. Bacardi's bounty for the Shade that increases her power by 15% when your party has a Grimoire does nothing. Power stacks for the Zealot when enemies are nearby do absolutely nothing. Fiery Faith, Eldrazor's Precision, Glory Hound, and a whole host of others are a complete waste of a talent in the live game currently. Pretty much any talent in the game that says increase power in such and such circumstance does not work right now. At all. Whatsoever. Now thankfully, Fat Shark is aware of the problem and have fixed some of these issues in the patch 1.05 beta, and they're doing a good job of getting on top of some of these seriously crippling bugs and trying to sort them out. But that is a huge section of the game that is not working properly, and that's not even mentioning the fact that hero power itself wasn't implemented in the way Fat Shark themselves wanted to implement it. One of the biggest changes coming in this patch is a large reduction in the amount of cleave and stagger you can deal to groups of enemies. Contrary to popular belief, this will not be the death of Melee, and no, Vermintide 2 is not a ranged-only game. Melee is still completely viable on Legend on the beta. I played a bunch of it, and I'm sure the balance for that will get even better as time moves forward. But essentially, there are supposed to be power caps for each difficulty level that prevent you from using your full hero power at lower difficulties. So if I was a 600 hero power kind of dude and I went down to play Veteran, I'd still be capped at, say, 300 power level, not 600, and that would prevent me from doing massive overkill damage to everything I go into melee with. But those caps right now are not functioning at all. And on top of that, when you're playing as a maxed out hero, you're actually supposed to have an unbuffed damage output level of about 60% what is currently in the live version of the game, which is why some weapons that you wouldn't typically consider crowd control weapons are still so fantastic for killing hordes right now, and why you're able to bully armor so easily as a maxed out character. So Fat Shark is going in, trying to fix all these issues and get the gameplay to where they want it to be, but in the meantime, some seriously fundamental flaws with the entire system have been exposed. And it's one of those things where I can't help but wonder why they felt it so necessary to make a super complicated system for something that works so well in Vermintide 1. Make a weapon function the same way on all difficulties. Only scale damage based on rarity, and you have a much simpler, much more elegant solution for learning core mechanics. But then that does beg the question, what would Fat Shark even do with all the power talents that will be working again come next patch, if they somehow decided to go back to their roots? That's a massive chunk of the talent trees for many of the characters that would require some pretty massive overhauls, which, by the way, could very easily lead me to another point if I felt like ranting, and that a lot of the talents in the game currently represent an illusion of choice rather than an actual choice. I mean, there are a lot of completely garbage talents in the game that no one would ever take in a million years. But again, if Fat Shark have proven anything with Vermintide 1, it is their dedication for turning flawed but incredibly fun games into much more polished products with the problems ironed out over time. They seriously did a great job supporting Game 1, and I see no reason to believe they won't do the same here as well. It does seem pretty clear to me they're going to stick with the system they have, at least for now, and at this point, they probably have to, and it's entirely possible that may be the best thing for the game in the long run, if they can get it working and balanced properly in a timely manner. It's just, it feels like they created so much extra work and so many extra nightmares for themselves, and at the end of the day, I'm not sure it was all worth it. There are ways to make an awesome talent tree that have nothing to do with power whatsoever, and I'm not sure this game ever needed power to begin with, but we'll have to see. I'm gonna trust them on this one. It's been an entertaining ride so far. I don't see myself putting this game away anytime soon, and as long as the balance and patches keep rolling in, and some new content drops periodically, maybe some great unclean ones and Demons of Chaos in a DLC some point down the road, I will continue to play. Don't let this video scare you away from the game if you were thinking of picking it up. I do highly recommend it. The core elements there are awesome. The gameplay is incredibly satisfying and fun, but I can guarantee it will be in a much better spot, say 2, 3, 4 months down the road. That much I can be pretty much certain of. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. Indie Pride, signing out for now.